you could argue with AI agentic, you have a declining metric, which is seat. If people are being replaced by agents, then your metric that you base it on is actually declining. So you've pegged all your money on a metric that is declining, and it's not aligned with the cost that is actually you're consuming.
Today, my guest is Dimi, former senior partner at Simon-Kucher, the world's leading pricing consultancy, where he spent over 15 years designing pricing for the biggest companies in the world that had complex variable costs like airlines, hotels, and travel companies.
You were telling the story of American Airlines.
You have first class on any flight, unlimited. I think they priced it $250,000. The people who actually bought it, and you know what? Now that I got it, I'm going to make the hell out of it.
Yeah.
It was costing them in loss about $250,000. This is an example where you take something which is consumed, a usage-based model, and you're trying to make it at least on a subscription or something like that.
In today's episode, we dive into how to apply those lessons into pricing AI and AI agents. In our conversation, we dig into why seat-based pricing is structurally broken for the age of AI agents, and what we can learn from a $250,000 per passenger mistake that American Airlines made, and what it teaches us about subscription models in the specific journey from cost-plus to outcome-based pricing.
A company called Posthoc, they actually came out and they said, we're going to be cost-plus pricing. Why is that bad? If you are charging on a cost-plus basis, you are committed to be the lowest cost provider.
Exactly.
You can't have anybody else beat you in price because otherwise you're going to have to go down below your cost. All the voice agents, whether you're calling a truck or you're booking a load or you're getting on the phone with a customer, like they're all pricing per minute. Why did we compensate BPOs on a per minute basis? Should be compensated is for like, you got off the phone real quick and that person was satisfied.
Because it starts with cost. And it's a cost basis mentality.
Oh,
it's a cost plus mentality, right? So I have something I can measure. It costs me this amount of time, put on margin, and that protects me. But what that is missing is, what is the value you actually delivered in that time?
If you're a founder or a pricing leader wrestling with these questions, this one is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And with that, I bring you the one and only Dimi.
Dimi, so good to have you.
Good to be here.
I would like to introduce to the audience, to our friends here at the Paid Podcast, Dimi, who comes from Simon-Kucher, formerly a partner of Simon-Kucher. And I'm going to mix it up a little bit. Instead of bringing a software person, I bring in a pricing strategist professional for the real world. So expertise is in travel and leisure.
Correct.
And other real world things like retail and transportation and things of that nature. So why don't you talk a little bit about the kind of work that you did in the past, and so that we can get on the same page?
So I mean, as a pricing specialist, travel is fascinating when you try to price it, because you've got a lot of elements that fundamentally you need to account for to price. There are various complexities, but the starting point is actually the value of what you're actually getting, right? So when you're going on holiday, what is the value of the place you're going to stay? Etc. So, I've priced things like hotel rooms, right? Where you start going into a perspective and say, okay, what is the value of having a sea view versus not having a sea view, or having a city view, or versus essentially a suite in terms of having more square meterage. So these are the elements you need to think about, but it's not, the interesting thing there is that hotels, for example, they have a massive fixed cost. So they have a variable cost, which is maybe their food and stuff like that. So you can't define that by just looking at the cost of those things. You actually need to understand the value that the customers get out of it, right? So there is a value in you having a sea view.
How do you find the value of sea view? Like, what is the value of a sea view?
So the value of the sea view, I mean, it's a bit of an art, to be honest.
Yeah, of course.
So I think you need to really understand your customers and how they value that. You probably need to do some experimentation. So a lot of the travel world these days does a lot of A/B testing to see essentially, okay, what is the value of that sea view, etc. The even more fascinating things about travel pricing is that nothing is constant.
Okay.
And I don't think software needs to go to that route. But you've got a supply and demand imbalance. That fundamentally means that sea view is actually more expensive in August than it is in May. Or
really?
Because there are more people that want to be and look at the sea in the summertime. So you've got that element of dynamic pricing, which is a lot of what I do. Which sort of can go with value, but it also goes with the fact that the value of something actually differs depending on when it is consumed. And I know we would eventually talk about software pricing, but there is probably an area in there that we might get to a situation that something that an agent does may be more valuable at certain points in time than in others, or in certain situations, right? I know this could scare the hell out of software people and tech people, right?
Yeah.
For travel,
They
that's
like their
fairly
revenue very
normal thing.
recurrent. Yeah.
But maybe just leave that out there in the ether, so that people just say, okay, couldn't we do that? Is he crazy? Are we talking about something?
So
that
what are the elements of pricing? So you have CView versus non-CView. Is competition an element in pricing?
Competition, it is an element, especially in travel pricing, or especially when things are very comparable.
Okay.
So airline pricing is a classic example where there are all those elements, like there are certain periods of time that people want to travel more, etc. So that plays into account in the pricing.
Yeah.
But guess what? If you're going to Italy, you don't really give a shit about which airline you use.
True.
Okay, maybe it's the loyalty points, maybe things like that.
Yeah.
But when you're going to Italy, the worst part of going to Italy is the flight.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. It's just like I'm looking. I have to go to the flight, I have to go to the airport, etc. So I'm not saying it's fully commoditized, but it's quite commoditized. What that means is that you need to take into account what the competition is charging.
Right.
On top of other elements, like you may have a better time of flight. You may have a better loyalty base, which basically creates a bit of a differentiation, because you say, I may go with BA because I know I'm going to get some points and that has some value to me, etc. But, competition is important. Now, when you talk to hotels, etc., you're going to have those places that are quite unique, quite outstanding. No one really, it's not so much about competition, it's about willingness to pay, right? What is my customers willing to pay for that value? And that's where you go to value-based pricing.
So like if you go to, like, say, Sicily, right? The coast of Sicily has a ton of hotels.
Yeah.
Right. And like one CView versus the next CView versus the next CView are all the same, right? So how
you could argue differently, but yes.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. No, so just tell me more. Like, how do you think about that? Like, next door they drop the price by $100 per night, and like
the thing is, the thing you need to think about is that it's not that you go to the coast of Italy and everyone has built exactly the same hotel.
Yeah.
Right. So there are differences.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Whereas a plane, there are not that many differences, to be honest. Whereas a hotel, there are differences.
Interesting. And you're staying longer. That's a bigger commitment too, I guess.
You stayed longer. It's part, everyone, if you look at holidays, one of the great things of that industry is that we are probably pricing the best time of your life in the year, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we work hard on all that. And really, why do we work and make money? To fundamentally go on holiday, right? So that's how I look at my job.
Yeah.
So it needs to be good. So the flight might not be the best. It doesn't really matter, as long as if you're traveling long haul, then that's a different perspective. But if you're going short haul, but actually where you're staying is very important, right? So there are things about, when you look at that industry, it's not only, you will look at there's a lot of effort that has gone into how you show the hotel, the images you do, etc. So that's a big part of fundamentally driving demand. There's a lot of, rating is a key part.
Right.
So like, people do look at rating a lot, and essentially because it has been, you have a lot of fragmented market that's been aggregated by Booking and stuff like that. People look at rating as another element, almost as important as price, or at least as a validation of price. So people could still validate and say, okay, maybe more expensive, it may be next door, but people like it more for whatever reason, right? And there are also a lot of biopsychology elements, right? So how do you show things? So, Booking are masters at that, like, this is running away, this is exceptional. They do those prompts that fundamentally make you book it.
Yeah. I love the one where they tell you like X many people have seen this.
Exactly. It's like, people are trending up. Like, exactly. But
I don't even know if it's true, but I'm like, babe, this is about to go. We got to make a decision.
Yes, exactly. And then, a lot of what I do is dynamic pricing. And actually, interestingly, and that traditionally was more, obviously there's a value element, but there's a lot of that element is capacity and demand. Fundamentally. Do I have a lot of demand? What is my capacity and what do I price it? What is now changing a lot with AI is fundamentally, can we ingest in those engines unstructured data? Because a lot of what I say, bookings, prices, they're structured data, right? There's a price, there's a booking, there's something in there that changes the price.
Yeah.
But what about unstructured data, right? What are the reviews saying? What are the statements that people are writing about this? And there is evidence to suggest that that's definitely something you need to start ingesting.
Interesting.
Because within that, there's an element of willingness to pay.
Oh, interesting.
There's an element of, if people have relatively positive reviews and they're of a specific segment like families, couples, etc., what they say is important. So when I'm targeting a family booking, which I can understand by saying, okay, people have kids, so they want to. probably getting that understanding perspective, that may differ how I look at my competition. So all I'm trying to say to you is that, yes, a sea view in Sicily is not, it is different, but it's not just different because the sea view is different, which is allocation element, but it's also the fact, if a hotel, for whatever reason, has good reviews from families and you're a family, you would probably be willing to pay higher.
Funny. So like we took a vacation to Spain.
Yes.
And the first thing we saw after like checking out the room, the kids club.
Yeah.
What time does it open? You know, like what time does it close?
Yeah.
And how early can we bring, like how young can we bring the children in?
Yeah.
And like if it didn't clear our bar of like taking our youngest daughter in, like right, we move on to the next place because we need to be able to like have the kids play. So like it's funny, and that is not baked into the price at all.
Yeah, exactly. But that, you know, that's where the thinking is going now.
Yeah,
right. Kind of ingest that.
Interesting.
But it's funny, right? It's a very different industry than your industry because it's very transactional, right? It's all about, I get a booking, I get a number, I get a revenue, and that's why it's also like a bit of a seesaw sometimes with performance, right? You know, you can make a lot of profits because you have a lot of bookings.
And
then COVID hits and you're
screwed. Yeah. So it's interesting because you have airlines, right, that have high variable costs.
Yeah.
So like it's a fuel cost and the maintenance costs, etc. And then you have so your margins must be smaller.
Your margins are smaller generally, and there are other factors on it.
Like what are the margin of an airline roughly?
The margin could be single digits.
Oh wow!
Literally, we could talk it, but and it's interesting. There was if you take United Airlines,
I
think there are years where the loyalty scheme is worth more than the
really
the value of the loyalty scheme because it's a parallel currency that has involved into an economy, etc. Right, but you know, you could be single digits. Now it depends on the year. That's the thing, and you could have years where you're loss making in airlines, right?
Jesus, oh wow.
And it's funny. It's not fully variable because they do invest. You know, these planes cost a lot of money, right? So you have a fixed cost in that perspective. But the airline model has ended up working a lot by fundamentally, it works economically if you fill the plane.
Okay.
Or if you sell a lot of business seats. So if you look at BA, they make their money on business class to the US and Asia.
Interesting.
They don't make money on economy in Europe.
Interesting. So they're just at a loss. Or like
they're at a loss or they're very low margins, and they make a lot of money because they're a hub, right? They have a London hub that fundamentally means that so sometimes if you look at, you know, you may decide to go to Italy and you look at the price and it's like, and a BA is like £600 and it is just 100. The reason it's £600 is because they're trying to price you out to allow Americans to go from, you know, San Francisco, New York.
Oh, interesting.
To Italy via London.
And
they're basically saying, well, if you want to fly from London to Italy, you're going to be displacing someone that I can get from the US who I can get far more money from.
Okay.
100%, so I'm just going to jack up the price. Because I'm basically penalizing you.
Oh, wow.
And that's why sometimes you see some crazy pricing. In that perspective. And you say, why that makes sense? Well, the other thing they do is, because, for example, they make a lot of money on transatlantic routes, never book a one-way ticket to the US unless you're not intending to come back. Because, you know, the return pricing is fundamentally, because they know they have to make a lot of money, what they do is they actually do return pricing, which means if you look at going to the US and coming back, if you book it as 2 one-way seats, the sum of that price is far more than if you book a return.
Interesting.
Because they're trying to incentivize you to come back with them.
Okay.
So that's another element that goes into there.
So, but it's interesting because going back to software, so like the hotel industry looks more like software, and then you've had a huge capex, right? And now you're just milking the margin of the people coming in with a very minimum variable. Whereas the airline looks more like.
You could argue a bit with the airline goes as well, to be honest. But the problem is that you can't commit to someone to, you can't say, here's your annual price for an airline, right? You cannot go down that route.
Okay, so tell me, we were talking about this a minute ago. So you were telling the story of American Airlines. Why don't you share that?
So American Airlines in the 80s, and there's still better examples nowadays, but in the 80s, they came up with an all-in-one ticket for a year. Annual pass, they called it. I think they priced it at an extortionate rate, $250,000, which basically means you have first class on any flight at any point, no limited, unlimited. So it sounded like a very expensive price, but it was a big loss maker.
Why were they doing that? Like, what was the impetus to do that?
I don't know. I don't know because I was very young at that age, but I think the impetus and airlines and hotels have, especially as a result of COVID and when COVID happened, one of the things they realize is that, it would be great if I had a recurring revenue element, right?
Yep.
Some sort of commitment that it doesn't rely so much on events that fundamentally change the reason people would travel a lot.
Yeah.
So, and I imagine that's probably a similar reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could also be market share or things like that. What they didn't count on the fact is that, yes, it is an expensive ticket, but the people who actually bought it were the people that knew, hey, actually my flight cost is probably not that far off.
Yeah.
And B, you know what? Now that I got it, I'm going to make the hell out of it, right?
I think I'm going to travel double.
I'm going to travel double. I'm always going to travel first class,
dude,
even if I go to a 1 hour flight.
This is in the 80s, too.
It was in the 80s, 90s,
a ton of money.
Yeah, a ton of money. So there were a lot of people, the people who bought it, actually, I think they were costing them in loss. It was estimated it was costing them in loss about 250,000. So it should have been priced at 500,000.
Okay.
And actually, eventually they started increasing it, realizing it, but it was still a loss making. Eventually, I think what happened is they went through a litigation route to say to the people who bought it that they've actually overused it, right? So I know, which is not fair because that's not how they advertise it. But this is an example where you take a something which is consumed, a usage-based model, and you're trying to make it at least on a subscription or something like that, and it goes completely down the drains. Because you don't realize the fact that there is a variable cost in every time someone uses it, right?
Yeah.
And what is interesting in airline is not just that there's a variable cost, there's also a displacement cost because you have a capacity.
Yes.
So you're actually, if I go on a first class, I'm displacing someone who would have paid an actual ticket.
Right.
So it's not just the loss of the variable element.
Oh,
it's
also
people
who didn't fly.
It's also it's also increasingly the opportunity cost of who I displaced and the money I lost. Because I could have sold that seat. That's
amazing.
On a paying first class customer, which is less of a concern in software.
Yeah. So tell me, we've been talking about this for a while. Of like, what are the things that people in software can learn from the real world? Like,
I think people in software,
they're
a bit of a wake up moment. I don't know if it's a Kodak moment. Probably it is a Kodak moment, or a Blockbuster's moment. And what I say about that is like, they've used a pricing model which gives them very good margins, right? Which fundamentally monetizes something that doesn't have any real variable cost. Okay, it has an initial cost, you set it up, etc. And they had a relatively stable monetization model, which is like per seat pricing or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly, the way they actually deliver the service is changing because of agents coming in. And if it's not changing because of them, well, someone else is changing it, right? So the change is coming anyway. It's a bit like, if Blockbuster is not changing, well, guess what? Netflix is coming down the way, right? So it's a similar paradigm. And that means that you have to actually learn a bit from the real economy. And the real economy means that as a starting point, these are the problems you have at the moment. First, you suddenly have a variable cost. You suddenly have something that every time someone uses you, because it uses an agent, there's a cost with it because the agent does things that fundamentally cost money, right?
Yep.
So if your cost base is on a metric, whether that's time or LLMs or whatever it is, well, if you've got a revenue model that's based on seats, they're a bit misaligned, right? And, you're a bit stuck because like, how could you justify going back to the seat-based and say, I need to increase now because, the price of a seat is higher? Based on what?
Yeah.
You're not actually adding more value. You're still giving me what you're doing. So you need to change the way you talk about the value you deliver, right? You need to change the model. The other thing you have is, you could argue with AI agentic, you have a declining metric, which is seat.
Oh, interesting.
Because if people are being replaced by agents, then your metric that you base it on is actually declining in the long term.
Right.
So you've pegged all your money on a metric that is declining, and it's not aligned with the cost that is actually you're consuming. So suddenly you need to think of a different ball game to be profitable. Right? Plus, seed one could argue is a value metric. Okay, more people use it, more value a company gets from it. But it's not a perfect value item, right?
But wait, even that doesn't work. Like, you don't want a lot of people using something.
That's what I'm saying. And also, like, you don't actually know if people use it, right? You may say I have 100 people. Does everyone use it? Some of them are dormant. Is there any value in it?
Right.
But it's a very convenient way, right? Because it's a way of fundamentally stating in that perspective. So I don't think it's a value metric, but one could argue in certain situations it's a value metric. So on top of it is a declining metric, is a value metric. We talked about the profit problem and the margin problem. The opportunity, though, because we talk about challenges a lot, the opportunity, though, is that you could argue that with agentic models, you now have an ability to actually understand the value that these agents are doing, not people, these agents are giving, right?
Yeah.
And I think SID was a convenient metric because you couldn't find other proxies of value.
Yep.
But now you probably you could have a plethora of proxies of value, right?
Yeah.
Ideally you could actually monitor what that agent does,
Yep.
what actually value it creates, and then come up with a different metric. The thing that is fascinating for me is that because agents is a relatively fluid thing, what metric you use is not a standard metric.
Right.
So depending on the situation, on the agent, the metric could be different, right? If it's a voice agent, it could be, and I talk about usage, but we need to talk about value, but it could be minute. If it's a web chat, it could be something else, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not a one solution fits all situation now. Okay, you need to change the model, but it's not the same for everyone.
Yeah.
The metric you use or the way you measure value differs by the use case or the company you're actually looking at.
Right.
So what you do need actually is something that captures that situation, identifies it, measures that value, and then starts monetizing it.
Yeah. So is value always relative to an alternative, or there is inherent value in what somebody's doing?
I think value to an alternative is a fair step of looking at it.
Okay.
Is a fair way of looking at it. So, and I think in agents specifically, you would probably start with, okay, what was the human value equivalent or something along those lines? You make a call, what would be what is the, let's say you're a call agent, you're replacing someone that would be on the call center. Probably your value is the time saved. The first thing you can think about is you save some time and you save some cost by not needing to have so many people to fundamentally deal with the calls, right? So that's a first way of looking at it. And that may be a step in the transformation, but it's not value-based.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, let's say you go down that line and you're a voice you're a voice engine like a Happy Robot or someone like that, right?
Yeah.
You say, okay, I can price per minute because that's probably a metric that talks about usage, talks about time. But guess what? That goes against the value you're giving, because the more an agent spends, the more minutes it spends, the less value delivers versus an alternative. Because if you are comparing the time you spend versus the time a human would spend, well, actually that difference is getting smaller if the agent takes longer. And it could incentivize an agent to take longer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
I'm not saying it's imperfect. I'm just saying it has that thing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what the real value is not, and the other problem with human value equivalent is, I think, 3-5 years down the line, that is irrelevant. Because you've replaced the humans.
Yeah.
So what is the human value equivalent?
Yeah.
What is that? What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's future-proof. So you need to really understand what is the value of the agent is doing.
Yeah.
So if the agent is closing a deal, or negotiating a price, okay, and that price drives your margin, well, that's a great outcome of saying, okay, can I get a percentage of that price? Because fundamentally, I negotiated that price.
Right.
On top of the value, maybe I replace someone else. But that's where I think we need to think about it. If we really need to think about future-proofing this, we can't just stick on human value equivalent. We need, or the alternative, because that alternative would not exist. And that alternative would be your competition eventually.
So what's really interesting is all the voice agents, whether you're calling a truck or you're booking a load or you're getting on the phone with a customer, they're all pricing per minute, right? And it's interesting because both customers and the vendor want that person to hang up as soon as possible.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? So
exactly.
the nobody likes to stay on the phone with an agent, human or not human anyway. You know what I mean? You want to get on with your day. So to begin with, the incentive is to decrease the number of minutes.
Yes.
You see what I mean? To price per minute is a bad metric.
It is. That's
exactly. At all times, right?
Yeah.
But it was bad even before agents came on.
Yeah.
Why? So why didn't this happen? In the world pre-agents, why did we compensate? BPOs or even the support centers on a per minute basis, when in reality, what they should be compensated is for you got off the phone real quick and that person was satisfied.
Yes, because it starts with cost, and it's a cost basis mentality.
Oh,
it's a cost plus mentality, right? So I have something I can measure. It costs me this amount of time, so I'm going to
margin on top of it, and boom.
I put a margin, and that protects me. And that's the good thing. If you go with a cost plus pricing, I don't like cost plus pricing, but cost plus pricing at least gives me some stability. That say, if I incur more cost, I'm going to price more. Right? I'm going to add a margin, and then I'm covered at least. I don't have the capacity. But what that is missing is that what is the value you actually delivered in that time? Right? So, and you're right, it goes against value. If the call was done quickly, the deal was closed, and it was closed at a good price, this is a fantastic outcome, right? And actually, if I price per minute, I've just priced it very badly, right? Because it doesn't reflect the fact that I closed the deal, I closed at a good price, and I closed it fairly quickly, right? So that's the thing, and that's where I think the agentic model.
So let's say the cost plus pricing before you move on, because there is a number of people who are doing this right now. So for instance, I don't know how OpenAI or Anthropic are pricing, but they're per token, right? And you have to assume that is they're putting some margin on top of like their cost. There are others like a company called Posthoc that they actually came out and they say we're going to be cost plus pricing. So we're going to take whatever it costs, we're going to put a margin on it, and we're going to pass it on. Why is that bad? Like, so explain to the rest of the world why is that bad? Because when I say it, nobody believes me. But you are a Simon-Kucher partner, so like you have seen this before.
Yes, so I think that there are various reasons why it's bad. I mean, it's understandable, so it's explainable.
It's easy.
So it's like it's easy, right? It's like okay,
it feels fair.
It feels fair, right? So it costs you that, you put a margin, etc. First of all, it sort of so it doesn't reflect value. The other problem it has is, I could argue if your costs are going down, then my price would go down. Right. So if it's a cost basis element, if you're charging, and I think I think people pick that up when you look at telcos, right? They used to charge per minute, per text, etc. And then suddenly people realized actually those things don't cost that much, the infrastructure. And then you had WhatsApp, etc. It's like, that's for free. So how can you charge me? So they started bundling into it and fundamentally saying, oh, you get unlimited minutes. Because the reality is there's no cost in minutes. So all I'm saying is the one of the problems you have is that if your costs are going down, then people expect your price are going down. The other problem is that, we don't, when we buy something, if you go to a restaurant, you eat a nice meal, you don't say that was, the value of the meal. Well, you should probably charge me on the time it took you to cook it or on the cost of the steak that you bought. You probably think the cost is important. What I mean by that is that, a steak should cost more than a pizza. Understandable, because people understand that either there's more protein or, a steak costs more. But you probably pay based on, that was a good steak. That was like, I got a good value out of it. I got full. It was like something innovative. And that's what you're missing there.
The sizzle.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So, and I think that's why it's wrong, because it doesn't reflect the value. And I think that is the principle. So it's an easy way. It's a very important way to survive and ensure you're making a margin, but it can only go wrong in my perspective in the long term. So you need to talk about value, and you need to demonstrate that value. And also, I think where it comes with value perspective, you can also differentiate a bit from competition. If everyone is charging per minute, then actually, you're charging per minute, I'm charging per minute. What's your minute rate? Okay, I'm going to go with the cheapest per minute rate.
If you are charging on a cost plus basis, you are committed to be the lowest cost provider.
Yes.
I mean, that is your strategy.
Exactly.
Because if you can't have anybody else beat you in price, because otherwise you're going to have to go down below your cost. So let's go to the next model, which I've seen, which is credits.
Yes.
So you have variable charging, and now you're introducing credits. Benefits, pros and cons of using credits.
Credits is a way of starting to differentiate to some extent either the cost of your model, right? You're starting to add a value element in there. And the way you do it, I think, in my perspective, and I'm not an expert on credits because I can't.
Well, and airlines use credits all the time.
So I'm an expert on parallel currencies, which is like loyalty schemes.
So how is that different?
It is a bit different, and I'll explain to you why. Because first of all, in airlines, a loyalty point is a reward. Is not what you pay for.
Oh, I see.
So there's a different behavioral mentality, right?
Yeah.
So I'll talk about the problems, I'll talk about the benefits. The problem with credits is that you're now introducing a parallel currency that you suddenly have to explain. Yeah. Airlines don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's a reward. And say, I got points. Yeah. I got 1,000 points. That may actually mean bugger all, right? 1,000 points may be 1 cent of value. But it's 1,000 points, right? But I get it.
Very stingy with the credits, by the way. Very stingy.
Yeah, exactly. But I get it.
It's for 1,000 miles. They got like 3 points. I'm like, well, what's going on? Like,
exactly. But that's the thing, right? It's like, whereas when you ask someone to pay for credits, they need to understand what that actually means. One of my clients, and it's a very different industry, was like a telco provider for emergency services, right? And it's a very old technology. They had to use very encrypted networks and things like that. And one of the problems they had is they came up with this they came up with a parallel currency. I'm not going to say what it was called because, but it was called something. Right?
Yeah.
And they had like this. They would go to their clients and say, "Yeah, you know, let's call it, I don't know, you know." And then they would go to the clients every now and then and say, "You use all your credits." And the customers were really frustrated with them because they didn't understand what the credit was. Why did they use all those credits?
Yeah.
And they were using...
It's like running out of internet.
Yeah, they were using... exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like emergency services using phones and stuff like that and say, why can you not talk about minutes? Why can we not talk about text? Why can we not about things that actually understand? And we talk about this credit notion that doesn't make sense. So the first hurdle you need to pass is that you need to understand what a credit is, you know, and how is it... what am I doing? Because fundamentally, what am I doing is driving those credits. Okay. I'm not against credits, but I think the problem you have with credits is when you start with a new client, you need to explain what it is, right? And that's a bit of a process. What is good about credits is you can start actually differentiating a bit and saying, you know what, this action that someone did is either worth more credits or consumes more credits, so I can start differentiating it in the background. But that's something I'm doing in the background. I don't need to show that to the customer. And that's why I think it's a way that people are starting to use it in this sector to deal with the problem they have with the cost coming in. Things are variable, and then I can talk about it. But it is a mechanism that is a parallel currency mechanism. You need to explain it. To me, is like, I wouldn't start with that if I was a new startup or something like that, because it's very complicated. But it's something I would evolve because it's something that you can use as an indirect way to reflect that certain things are more valuable than others and things like that. So it has that benefit.
Okay. How do you think about so for instance, OpenAI and Anthropic, right? They charge per token.
Yes.
Right. Which is a way to say credits. And they don't explain to you what a token is. They say it's roughly 2.5 words.
Yeah.
But you have no idea what a token is, right? And somehow we're okay with it.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Like, so when if you were to go to any other vendor, like they will give you a laundry list of like the things that each of their packages include, and you have no idea what you're getting for it. Like if you go to Datadog, you get like pages and pages and pages of like what's included in each of the packages. You have no idea what a trace is or like a kilobyte of whatever. Am I going to use it or not? So you can be transparent and mean nothing, you know what I mean? Or you can put a credit around it and like all of a sudden just like abstract away the problem and like, you know, get on with it. So like what would you advise for startups out there? Because like their costs are variable.
Yes.
So do you advise to implement credits, or do you advise to expose all the details of their costs so that people can, you know,
I think it's not as simple. It's not a simple question, a simple answer, right? And I think
costs about $1 million to bring Simon-Kucher.
More or less, but if you talk about OpenAI, I think they generated something completely new, right? So they could probably they could probably have a very good reason to introduce a new currency that we can talk about. So that's what I'm saying is like they came up with something that wasn't there at all.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And it was a high scale. It's a bit like, you know, it's a bit like an internet moment, like the internet came. So I can, hey, by the way, the way you pay for this thing, which is completely new, is token.
Interesting.
All I'm saying is, I think it's if you're doing something that someone else is doing, or it's not completely new, then it's a bit difficult to explain what a credit is. I'm not against it. I think you can start with that world, but you need to start explaining what it actually means and what you get for it. And that's a bit of an inertia, and I think it might require more effort to do so. I think that's our perspective. What I would like, what I think would make intrinsic sense, but it is a journey to get there to some extent, is I think ideally what you want to talk about is outcomes. Okay. What outcomes or value elements you can go, right? So what is an outcome? We now have do we have a possibility to say, okay, looking at the agents, what they do, they get to an outcome, they resolve a query, they improve the NPS, whatever they do, right? So that's an outcome, and that's very valuable. So can I link it to that perspective? That's what ideally we want to do, because it's suddenly you have something that demonstrate the value, and it's fairly understandable to someone. Oh, okay, you achieve that outcome, great, right? It's like, and it's in real economy, right? If you get someone to fix your garden, you pay them for fixing your garden, right? You don't pay them. You don't. They may charge per day, but that's not relevant to you. It's like, okay, you've fixed the right garden, right? So I pay you for that because you made it very well. So that's what I'm saying, is like it's more. That's what we get to. Now, credits may be in the way of doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to say it's one or the other, because this is a journey. Yeah. It's a disruptive journey. It's an exciting journey as a pricing expert. But it's something that, we may go through various iterations to get there.
So how have you in the real world, where have you seen things move to outcomes? Or were things always on outcome or always on a cost plus basis?
I think that sometimes it's intrinsically defined. Like, you go to a restaurant, you buy a meal, the outcome is you got fed and you liked it, so there's an outcome. And
because, like, for instance, I was thinking about a plumber, right? Like, you have a leak.
Yeah.
You call a plumber, the plumber shows up, and then you get the bill for the leak, right? Yeah. If the plumber doesn't fix the leak and leaves, you don't get a bill.
No.
You know what I mean? It doesn't say, like, I was here for 8 hours and I leave and you pay me for the 8 hours. I'm not paying you the hours.
Exactly.
It's still leaking.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? Like, so when do things start turning into outcomes? Like, what have you seen in your experience when you brought somebody closer to an outcome than they were before?
It's difficult to say, because I've always dealt with businesses that sort of had either a service or a good that they were delivering, and fundamentally means that once that is delivered, you have to pay for it, right? It's a bit of a
that is the outcome.
That is the outcome, right? So, and I know you mentioned to me before, like, wouldn't it be great if airlines only charge you once you actually land? Because fundamentally,
that's like you pay for. I was thinking about that. I'm like, it would be great if you pay for the airline, and like once you get to Milwaukee, like happy to pay for getting me here. But otherwise you don't. You know what I mean? Like,
it would be great, but it would be very terrible for airlines to actually make any money.
100%.
So that's the perspective. And by the way, airlines is a great example where they make a lot of money. A lot of the money they make is because they play with the things like, well, if you want to change the plane, if you want to change the seat, you have to pay your money, or if you want to book a seat, you have to pay the money, or
if you want to use if you want toilet paper in the toilet, like,
exactly,
you have to pay us money.
They're masters at that, which actually comes from financial necessity, which is essentially that these all ancillary things is actually have very high margin, and they're a very tight margin business. So they needed to find other ways to fundamentally make money. And they sort of went with, okay, as you said, you want toilet paper, you go to that perspective. But now it's funny, like if you go know what I find interesting when I look at this industry is that, I remember you used to book a ticket and you were assigned a seat. You didn't have to pay for the seat because you thought you paid for the seat. I paid for the ticket. I paid for a seat. Now you have to pay for the seat that you want to sit on. And if you ever look at an airline map now and you try to pick a seat, it has become so differentiated. It's like, if you're in the front row, it's a higher price. If you're near the exit, which supposedly may be a good or a bad seat, but apparently it's a good seat because you have more legroom. But if things go bad, that's the worst if you want to be, right? So, but you go like the middle seat now is not as attractive. So you got. I think you got to a point that I think there are airlines. If you go and look at that, they could be like 10 price points for a seat.
Yeah, that's maddening.
And
but it's funny because like this goes against what everybody has learned, which is you don't want to give people a ton of choices. Because it will freeze. But now the choices are like even in travel. Like if you just book a ticket on EasyJet alone, right, or like Ryanair or whatever, you're picking across hundreds of variables. Just to go like 45 minutes away somewhere.
Exactly.
Why is that? Like did something change?
Because they've trained the customers.
Okay.
So the customers become trained, right? So you've learned through that process because you've booked seats many times, and you've learned through the process that you have a choice of tickets, and you can book like the perspective. And then they come with those things, and then it's an evolutionary process. Like you start simple, and then you complicate. But people have been trained. Right. So I think that's the perspective. It's the same as my mom, right? Probably doesn't give a toss about the gigabytes she gets on her mobile phone, but she still pays for it.
Interesting.
Right. But it's like, I'm probably very interested in the gigabytes I pay. So all I'm saying is that I think it's a part of like education. If you look at BA at the moment, and that's something that I find very fascinating, how they've evolved even further. I think they've gone too far So they used to have like 3 ticket types. Like if you go and you say, okay, this has got a non-flexible, fully restricted ticket, sort of a flex, and then a semi-flex and a flex or something like that. Now you go and they say, okay, yeah, you want an economy seat? Well, you can have restricted, or you can do one thing. I mean, I think you can have 5 or 6 choices, which are to be honest, it's a bit too much.
Interesting.
Okay, I don't know if they're A/B testing or something like that, but that's get too much. But I think the complexity you see in airlines and things like that is because they've sort of educated the customers. The customers are got accustomed, and then they go to the next level of complexity. And that could be something that software may learn from.
Interesting. So tell me, let's switch over to software now. So everyone is outcome curious at this point. Yeah. Everyone wants to move to outcomes and trying to figure out how it is. But when it comes to pull the trigger, they're like, oh, my customer's going to get, scared.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, definitely. My investors want recurrent revenue. I can't do it. And then they freeze. What is your advice for people who want to move to outcomes? Like, how do you get there from a seat or from metering or from cost plus to an outcome conversation? Where do you start? Do you start with your investors? Do you start with the customers? Do you start with the big ones? Do you start with small ones, the new ones? Like, what would be a good map?
I wouldn't start with my investors because they would freak out if I tell them that we're not having recurring revenue.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Because they're used in that drag. That's what has driven a lot of the tech sector.
Yeah, for the past 20 years.
For the past 20 years, right? I need to tell my investor why I need to change my business model.
Yep.
Which basically means that it needs to come from maybe the margin economics of my business as it changes, but fundamentally from my customers as well. So I think I would start by understanding my customers and the outcomes. I would probably match it with me changing my product.
Okay.
Right. So like I'm introducing AI agents. That's sort of a new thing that you need to get, and you sell the value of that perspective. I think that outcomes is a great North Star, but the problem is that it requires some thinking, it requires some data collection. You need to understand what outcome actually is.
Yeah.
And what is the value of that outcome? So it's not going to happen overnight, and it's quite a big change and inertia to do so.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing is let's fundamentally get the fundamentals right before we go into changing our pricing model. Can we I know I said I don't like cost plus pricing, but whether that's value-based pricing, any pricing in the real world, I need to understand my cost.
Yes.
That's the most important thing I need to get first, right? So, and these AI agents can go and do whatever the hell they want, and you need to actually start monitoring or measuring what the cost of that thing is.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
So let's get that cost clear, right? Because at least if I can't go into outcome-based pricing, I can at least talk about, this thing that I'm telling you, I'm using AI agents that cost me this much, etc. It's also an important aspect because I can actually use it to make my agents more efficient or effective, because I can start monitoring. So that's your first perspective. The second perspective is, okay, if I've got a cost, then, outcome is quite a big thing, but quite a big leap. Maybe I can look at usage-based or, metering or something, or can I find a metric that reflects usage? That could be minutes or deals done or whatever it is. A metric that fundamentally, if you use me, you need to pay for me.
Yeah.
And that scales a bit with the underlying cost that is variable, right? So, and what I mean it scales a bit or it aligns is because that then allows me to fundamentally ensure I get a margin every time I'm penalized by the cost.
Right.
Now, and you could be in a hybrid world, right? You may not jump into that usage page. You could say, you need to pay a platform fee, and that keeps my investors happy because I still get a recurring revenue. Yeah. But now we need to use it if you want to use that functionality. And that's why I think it may be me need to merge with I'm doing something new now.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's too much change.
But this is the part that I have, I'm a little confused with usage in general, is that if you have an agent or a person, right? If you pay per usage, you're paying for the time it takes to get something done.
Yeah.
Right? I never heard anybody that I wish something took longer to do than not. You see what I mean? Like nobody ever said, I wish that what you just did, it took you 3 hours instead of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So you are aligning yourself against a metric that nobody likes.
Fully agree.
You see what I mean? And at all times, like nobody has patience.
No.
So like, why are we selling patience?
Yeah, no, I fully get it. It's because it comes from a cost perspective, and I'm against that. But I'm trying to do a transition. Right? I'm trying to help a transition. I don't think you should stay to usage, but at least it depends what your economics are. If your cost is too high, you need to move to something that does it. Ideally, as you start seeing your agents, what they do and monitor, and you get an outcome, then you can actually say, oh, what is a real outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
what if you pay X if you want the thing done in 2 hours, or you pay Y if you want it in 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe then you start capturing the actual differential.
So you say you go with the value of time, or you could say, I'm to an agent, I'm dealing with a customer complaint, in an ideal situation. At the end of the call, you ask for a NPS rating, you get an NPS rating. Hey, bam, I'm going to charge you based on the NPS rating.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, did I do a good job? And that's what is important. If you took time, you bloody at least did a good job in that world, right? I've got a satisfied customer,
right.
Or, if you got an agent that does negotiation, I got a good price, right? A good price. But there are other situational elements in there, right? Because you could, if I take that example, right? You got a, let's say you automate brokerage and you fundamentally go and try to get someone to, you're using a voice AI agent to fundamentally close a deal and a price in that. You could go with, okay, the best price I got, which maximizes the margin between what I actually charge my customer versus what I actually cost me to do. The bigger the difference, then the higher the price. That's a good metric. But what that is missing is potentially that actually, this could be a job that I got 100 quotes. And if I charge per quote, but the 100 quotes actually means that it was an easy job to get it done.
Yeah.
So I dealt with 100 quotes. Well, yeah, that cost you a lot, but actually it was an easy job to get one.
Yeah.
What if I got only 2 or 3 quotes because I know it was a difficult job to get someone.
Yeah.
And actually, so if I charge based on usage again, or how many quotes I dealt with or how much time, that is missing the point that actually I found a job was something quite complicated or difficult.
Interesting.
To deal with. And how do I reflect that?
Interesting.
So it goes into those questions. And that's the beauty, I think, of this disruption, that we're not talking about a world you need to move from seat to minute.
Yeah.
I would be a challenge, but we're not talking about more metric. You need to move from seat to a metric that depends on what you're actually doing.
Right.
Because outcome is not the same for everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. And I think also that enables you to also ideally differentiate from your competition. And the extreme, and I know people would start panicking now what I say. What that it means, though, is that you could get into an eventual situation that, maybe now all your customers are priced per seat. I could get into a situation that I have 10 different metrics that I use to charge 10 different customers.
Right.
Because the outcome or the value is different to each one of them.
So tell me more about that. Because every time I talk to a founder, to a CEO, they were like, well, I don't like this outcomes because there's too many of them. It's too many ways to price. And like my sellers are going to get confused and my customers are going to get confused if I don't have a single rate card. What's your point of view on that? Because I hear that and I'm like, do your customers really say that or you?
I don't think the customers say that.
Okay.
I think that's not coming from our customers, but it goes back to what I was telling you. I come from a world of complexity, which I love.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sophistication is a word.
Sophistication, whatever you want to call it, right? And that's why I said people would freak out by me saying what I said.
Yeah.
But I think the point is that could be an eventual evolution. But that, we need to get through a lot of hurdles. We need to, move away from seats.
Yeah.
Maybe we go through usage. Maybe we go through credits.
Yeah.
Maybe we go through a single outcome, a single metric, because that, the use case, etc. But, when I talk to travel industry, they're all talking now about personalized pricing, and they've been talking about it for the last 10 years.
Right.
And personalized pricing.
So every individual gets a different price.
Yes.
Interesting. Why?
And not a different price, a different proposition. So what I mean by that is,
I like that. I like that. A different
it's like,
proposition.
Manny, you like your lounges? I'm going to give you a ticket that has a lounge access.
Yeah.
Dimi doesn't like lounges because he's a simple guy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give him a ticket that doesn't have a lounge access, and I'm going to give him a price. So, there was a famous quote by I think this is an American airline CEO. Again, I go back to the 90s, 80s. I'm an 80s kid. I was born in 76, so I'm an 80s kid.
Yeah.
But he said the problem with airline pricing is that I can only have up to 300 price points, which is the number of seats he had in the plane.
Yeah.
Okay. Because in his mindset was that, I could charge far more price points.
Yeah.
Because there's such a varied willingness
to
pay.
So why is B2B so stuck with like a handful of prices, like only 3 options, and make it super simple? At the end of the day, like if the customer is getting, like if I get a tailored suit with a personalized price that matters to my business, that is accountable to the outcomes of my business, why wouldn't I like that? You know what I mean? And we hire very smart people in B2B.
Yeah.
Like, so why is there this friction against, pricing customization?
Yes, and I think you sort of get it in a quasi way.
Yeah.
In B2B, which is discounting. Which is not a great
100%,
way.
100%. Dude, like if you look at this is so interesting. So like whenever I'm sure that you walk into a job, and you ask like how many policy violations do you have on the discount? They'll be like no more than 10%.
Yes, classic.
and then you look into it, and what's that number? Probably like 30 or 40 or 50.
But
right?
more than that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I was like, say, oh, that's not a discount. It's like it's standard. Well, it's not.
Yeah.
And you look at, and you then interestingly, what you also see is that the discount spikes at the various pages that the CEO has to go whatever. And you have situational situations like it's like the CEO had to go to the bathroom, so he approved that deal because he was in a rush.
But it's so fascinating because every B2B company I talk to, I ask him, what percent of your customers deliver 80% of your number? And it's top 20%, almost always.
Yeah,
it's top 20%
always.
of the customers
Pareto
deliver 80%. It's Pareto everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? So top 20% of the customers deliver 80% of it. Well, the top 20% of the customers, which one of those is a standard deal?
Mm-hmm.
0.
Yeah.
All of them are custom.
Mm.
Okay, so do you want more of this 20% deals? It's like, of course you do.
Yeah.
But you want a standard price on deals that are really big. That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So at scale, you want 80% of your deals to deliver 80% of your value.
Yeah.
They're all going to be custom.
Yes, and that's the thing, right? And I think it's a matter of scale that we haven't done that.
Okay.
And it's a matter of people, how many people do I need? Because you're gonna have a sales force, you're gonna focus them on the top 20 deals.
Right.
Or 20% deals.
Right.
And they have to be customized because they're big
100%.
deals.
Dude, like this is what I love about working with reps. I love people who are coin operated because they know the true north.
Yes.
You know what I mean? They're going to work in the deal that is going to pay the most amount of money.
Yeah,
That's it. Like the rest of the deals, who cares?
Yeah.
But the one that is going to pay the most amount of money, that's my favorite deal.
Yeah.
And they're going to be going straight to that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much for
great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on this podcast and bringing a real life perspective into this world of software.
Fantastic.
So great to have you.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Awesome.